Pick that up, sweetheart. That is what Dr. Whitfield said 17 minutes before the helicopter landed on Seattle General's rooftop in Houston. Laura Bennett's hands never shake. Not under the fluorescent lights that buzz in 3-second intervals. Not when the antiseptic smell burns her sinuses during 12-hour shifts. Not even now as she kneels to collect patient charts scattered across cold linoleum tile while residents pretend to study their phones and a medical student with a designer watch steps over the scattered papers without breaking stride. She works night rotation in the cardiac ward. Arrives early. Leaves late. Speaks only when asked direct questions. The other nurses stopped inviting her to coffee after the first week. She doesn't attend hospital social events. She doesn't use the staff break room. She doesn't volunteer her name in conversations that move beyond, "Can you grab the 16 gauge from Bay 3? She has made herself invisible, which was the entire point when she accepted the position 8 months ago with a background that had exactly 0 employment records before 2 years prior. Seattle General's HR department had asked minimal questions. The hospital was understaffed. She was qualified. That was enough. In her locker behind her scrubs, folded beneath a spare pair of compression socks, a pair of worn combat boots caked with ticret dust that she touches once per shift like a rosary. The leather is cracked. The laces are frayed. The treads are packed with sand the color of dry blood. She moved her fingertips across the boot leather during her last break at 2:36 a.m., standing alone in the locker room while the night shift hummed forward without her, and felt the familiar weight of distance settle into her shoulders like scar tissue reforging itself. Her hands are steady when she starts fours on the first attempt. Steady when she repositions bedridden patients twice her size, moving them with the terrifying fluid precision of someone who has moved unconscious wounded through rubble and fire. Steady when she reads cardiac rhythms on the monitor and sees the story they tell in their peaks and valleys. The other nurses ask where she trained. ICU rotation? Military hospital? Trauma center? She never answers. They ask her name pronounced correctly and whether she has siblings and if she grew up near Houston. She provides no expansion. Her voice is small and even. Her eyes track downward during conversation. She has become a ghost who clocks in and performs medicine with surgical precision and clocks out, carrying only a single pair of boots and a classified order never to surface again. A thin scar runs from her right ear to collarbone, visible when she turns her head under harsh hospital light. It is the kind of scar that comes from something sharp moving at velocity. The nurses have noticed. They don't ask. Dr. Whitfield noticed too, during her first week, and made a point of mentioning it in the supply closet within earshot of 2 residents. That's the kind of mark you get from a bad choice, he'd said. Let's hope her medical decisions are better than her personal ones. The morning rounds begin at 6:15 a.m. Dr. Whitfield arrives in loafers polished to mirror shine and a lab coat that costs more than Laura's monthly rent. His voice arrives before his body, confident, loud, carrying the cadence of a man who has never been told no by anyone who could enforce it. His father was a cardiologist. His mother was a board member at Johns Hopkins. His brother-in-law is a federal judge. He carries these facts the way other men carry wallets. They are proof of something. Of belonging. Of the kind of institutional power that bends around him like air. Let's see which nurses actually read the chart updates, he announces, stopping at the station where Laura is documenting vitals from the night shift. His Italian loafers click against tile in rhythm with his voice. Click. Click. Stop. Bennett. When did we start letting the help make clinical decisions? The room goes silent. For residents look away. A nurse at the adjacent station suddenly becomes very focused on her computer screen. The monitor behind Laura beeps its steady rhythm, 62 beats per minute, healthy sinus, a heart doing exactly what it is supposed to do. Laura sets down her pen. Her jaw tightens exactly 1 millimeter. Imperceptible to anyone not looking for it. She looks up with eyes the color of a stormy Atlantic and says nothing. I'm talking to you, Bennett. Yes, doctor. 2 words. Deferential. soft enough that residents have to lean in to hear it. Did you code a patient into arrhythmia last night? He holds up a chart. Taps it against his palm. Tap. 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 Because according to this, someone with minimal credentials made a call on vasopressor dosing that. The patient's pressure was dropping. Laura's voice is steady as a surgical laser. 80/45. The previous dosing had plateaued. I consulted the on-call cardiologist at 1:33 a.m. Dr. Mercurio approved the increase verbally. I documented it at 1:35. You consulted? Yes, doctor. You made a clinical call before consulting. Laura's eyes don't move. The on-call cardiologist confirmed my assessment matched protocol. The patient stabilized at 104/62 by 2:11 a.m. Full recovery in sinus rhythm. Dr. Whitfield's face doesn't change. His smile stays perfectly centered. That must be nice. Making decisions that turn out right. But let me explain how hierarchy works at this institution, Bennett. He steps closer. 2 feet away now. Close enough that she can smell his cologne, expensive, aggressive, a brand that comes in a bottle designed to convey power. You don't make calls. You observe. You document. You defer. When you've been here longer than 2 years, when you've completed a residency, when you've actually earned a credential that means something in this hospital, then you can tell me what protocol says. Until then, you pick things up when I drop them. You smile when I make a joke, even if you don't get it. And you certainly don't make clinical decisions without explicit prior authorization. The room is so quiet you can hear the fluorescent lights buzz. Laura sets her hands flat on the desk. Understood, doctor. What was that? Understood, doctor. Slightly louder. Exactly as loud as required. No more. No less. Dr. Whitfield nods like he's confirmed something important. Like this is the natural order of things reasserting itself. He drops a stack of charts on the desk, 6 of them, fanned out, some with post-it notes attached. A pen drops separately. It rolls toward the edge of the desk. Print updated assessments on all of these. I want them before I round on the ICU in 40 minutes. And Bennett. She's already reaching for the charts. If you're going to wear a stethoscope around here, you might want to learn that it doesn't make you a doctor. It just makes you more dangerous than if you'd stayed in school. He walks away. His loafers click against tile. 1, 2, 3, 4. The sound of them fades toward the intensive care ward. Around Laura, the other nurses slowly return to their screens. A resident clears his throat and tries to look like he was never really listening. Someone's monitor beeps. Someone's for pump chimes. The hospital settles back into its rhythm like water closing over a stone. Laura collects the scattered charts. 40 minutes is impossible. Comprehensive assessments for 6 cardiac patients, typed, printed, reviewed. But she doesn't acknowledge the impossible part. She simply stands, moves to the computer, and begins typing at a speed that makes the medical student at the next station glance over twice and then look away because looking might invite conversation. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part happened during the cafeteria shift change at 11:22 a.m. Laura had finally completed Dr. Whitfield's assessments in 34 minutes flat and spent the remaining 6 minutes prepping for her actual rounds. She'd eaten nothing all shift. Her stomach was making its opinions about this known. She entered the cafeteria with a tray, black coffee, plain yogurt, a banana. An unremarkable lunch. She was heading toward a quiet table in the corner when Dr. Whitfield's voice cut across the room like artillery fire. Hey everyone, I want to introduce you all to our new nurse. He was standing near the coffee station with 3 board members and a hospital administrator. 30 people could hear him. 50, including the kitchen staff. Bennett, come here. Laura's hands tightened on the tray. Her shoulders stayed level. She walked toward them at normal pace, not faster, not slower. Control. This was all about control and not giving anyone the satisfaction of seeing you break. "I'm making a bet with the surgical staff," Dr. Whitfield announced, loud enough that the room had gone quiet. 100% of the attending physicians in this department, that's me, Dr. Han, Dr. Morrison, and Dr. Keller, we're betting that Bennett here quits within a week. Anyone want in on the action? The administrator laughed. One of the board members smiled uncomfortably. Laura stood 3 feet away with her coffee and yogurt and banana, waiting. "What do you think, Bennett?" "Fair odds. I think I should return to my rounds, doctor." "That's what I like about her," he said to the board member. "No spine. No ego. Just obedience." And then it happened. A resident, young, nervous, the kind of person who would later claim it was an accident, stepped backward from the coffee station at precisely the moment Laura turned. The resident's elbow caught the edge of her tray. Black coffee splashed down her white scrubs. The yogurt container flew. The banana rolled. The entire tray hit the cafeteria floor with the sound of something shattering that wasn't actually meant to break but broke anyway from the force of the fall. The room went dead silent. Laura looked down at the spreading puddle of coffee and the yogurt cup rolling away and her shirt dripping black. She felt 30 pairs of eyes on her, waiting to see if she would flinch, if she would cry, if she would retreat. She felt the weight of every humiliation stacking on top of the last 8 months, the classified operation that had erased her from records, the direct order never to surface, the combat boots hidden in a hospital locker like a secret that could destroy everything. She bent down and started picking up the pieces. A resident handed her napkins. She nodded once without looking at his face. Dr. Whitfield was still smiling, still watching, still calibrating whether his strategy was working or if he needed to increase the pressure. "Tough luck," he said. "Those stains don't come out of polyester." Laura finished collecting the debris. She deposited it in the trash. She left the cafeteria without responding. Her shirt was ruined. She had 6 more hours on shift. She changed into a spare in the locker room, moving with the controlled precision of someone who had learned a long time ago that the only power you have is the power to keep moving, to keep breathing, to not give anyone the satisfaction. In the supply closet at 1:17 p.m., during a moment when no one else was looking, she locked the door behind her and reached into her locker. Her hands found the combat boots, that pair of worn leather, that dust from Tikrit, that weight of everything she had been before she became invisible. She pressed her forehead against the cool canvas of the locker door and, for exactly 90 seconds, let her hands tremble. Just her hands. Just the trembling. The rest of her stayed locked down tight as a bunker. Then she released them. Steadied her breathing. Unlocked the supply closet door. Returned to the cardiac ward where room for B had just been assigned a new patient. A Navy SEAL named Marcus Chen. Paralyzed from a firefight 3 months prior. Transferred to Seattle General for long-term cardiac monitoring due to previous trauma-induced arrhythmias. Laura reviewed his chart at the nurse's station. 62-year-old male. Service record redacted. Emergency contact listed as a unit commander. In the section marked Special Conditions, someone had noted, patient reports fragmented memory loss surrounding extraction event. Recommend careful handling of trauma discussion. She entered room for B at 1:43 p.m. carrying a blood pressure cuff and a heart rate monitor. The man in the bed had dark eyes and shoulders that still carried the shape of someone who had once been very strong. His right arm lay on top of the blanket. His left arm was strapped to the mattress for his own safety. As she approached to take his vitals, his eyes tracked her face. Confusion crossed his expression. Recognition that wasn't quite recognition. He stared at her name tag, dark letters on white plastic, and his mouth moved like he was searching for a word that lived somewhere he couldn't quite reach. "You okay, Mr. Chen?" Her voice was soft again. The small voice she used when patients were frightened or in pain. "Your name," he said quietly. "I know your name." Laura didn't respond. She simply took his blood pressure, 118/74, elevated but stable, and documented it on his chart. She was good at this part. The part where you acknowledge nothing. The part where you move forward into the next moment and the next and the next, and you never let anyone see what you're holding in your hands when nobody's looking. The monitor behind him beeped its steady rhythm. 65 beats per minute. A strong heart. A heart that had survived extraction from Tikrit and 3 months of recovery and a transfer to a hospital where someone had tried very hard to erase the person who had kept that heart beating when there was nothing left but will and memory and 2 hands that knew exactly what to do when the world was ending. "Your vitals look good," Laura said. She adjusted his for. "Let me know if you need anything." She was turning to leave when Marcus Chen's voice stopped her. "Phantom." Laura's hand froze on the door frame. The room went very still. Outside, a helicopter siren wailed in the distance, getting closer, but that was still 17 minutes away and neither of them knew that yet. Right now it was just a paralyzed Navy SEAL staring at a nurse who didn't exist, who had never existed, who had spent 2 years becoming the kind of invisible that only people with her training could achieve. She didn't answer. She simply left the room and closed the door behind her and returned to her rounds, her hand steady again, her composure intact, her boots still waiting in the locker like a promise or a threat or maybe both at once. The morning briefing room smelled like instant coffee and something sharper, the antiseptic burn of a hospital that never quite sleeps. Laura stood at the back of the assembled nursing staff, her hands flat on the counter, watching Dr. Whitfield arrange patient charts like a general positioning troops. He was tall in the way that made doorways seem smaller, with the kind of confidence that had nothing to do with competence and everything to do with the medical school ring on his left hand and the family name that appeared on 3 wings of the hospital's donor wall. He turned to Laura without looking directly at her, the way you might address furniture that had disappointed you. "Bennett. Come here." She moved forward. 23 eyes followed her. "Patient in 3C needs a full metabolic panel and a repeat chest X-ray. Do you understand those instructions, or should I use smaller words?" His voice carried the texture of a tool grinding against stone, rough, deliberate, designed to leave marks. Someone in the back of the room coughed. It might have been a laugh. Laura's jaw tightened. 1 millimeter. That was all. "Understood, doctor," she said, her voice level as a cardiac monitor in sinus rhythm. She turned back to the counter and returned to her charting, each keystroke precise, each number exact. She did not look at Whitfield again. She did not give him the satisfaction of watching her face register anything at all. His frustration was palpable, the kind of frustration a man feels when he throws a punch and hits nothing but air. By noon, the cafeteria was crowded. 60 staff members in the lunch line, another 20 seated at the long tables that ran the length of the room like a mess hall. The fluorescent lights hummed their endless institutional song. Laura stood third in line, her lunch tray balanced on her hands, sandwich, salad, water. Standard. Forgettable. The kind of meal you eat without tasting it. Whitfield was at the coffee station, talking loud enough for the entire room to hear. His voice had the quality of a man used to being listened to, the kind of surgeon who believed his own mythology. "I'm making a bet," he announced, turning to face the crowd. "Anyone want in? I give Bennett here 1 week before she quits. 7 days. The whole surgical staff can split the pot." He smiled. It was the smile of someone who had never encountered resistance that held. A resident standing beside Laura, Dr. Chen, one of Whitfield's protégés, a man whose eyes always looked slightly afraid, shifted his weight. His elbow caught her lunch tray with the precision of someone who had been told exactly where to be and when. The tray tipped. Her sandwich slid across the white linoleum. Soup spread like a stain no one could ignore. The cafeteria went silent. 40 people watched. Someone's dropped fork clattered against a plate. Whitfield's voice cut through the quiet like a scalpel. "Oops. Better clean that up, sweetheart. Wouldn't want anyone slipping." Laura knelt. The tiles were cool against her knees. She picked up the tray, now bent, and collected the pieces of her lunch, piece by piece, using napkins to wipe the floor while the entire cafeteria held its breath. Her hands did not shake. Her face remained a mask of professional neutrality. She stood, threw the napkins into the waste bin, and returned to the ward without getting replacement lunch. By evening, her stomach would remind her what she had sacrificed to dignity, but in that moment, in that room, she gave Whitfield nothing. No anger. No tears. No visible damage. That was what made him furious. The afternoon shift brought charts and more charts, the endless documentation that proved care had been given. Laura worked through her assignments with mechanical precision, each note written in the tight, economical script of someone who had learned to document everything because everything mattered. Around 3 o'clock, Whitfield appeared at the nurse's station with Marcus Chen's file in one hand and something darker in the other, the expression of a man who had decided it was time to stop testing and start breaking. He threw her patient charts across the counter. Folders slid. Paper scattered like leaves after a storm. One landed on the floor. "Pick that up, sweetheart," he said, his voice now carrying the texture of something sharp. "And next time, chart the vitals in the order I specified." The order she had used was, in fact, the correct order. The order every nurse in the hospital used. But she picked the papers up anyway, gathering them in silence while he watched her face for any sign of fracture. Her only tell was the muscle in her jaw that flexed once, hard enough to feel, and then went completely, utterly still. She did not respond. She did not argue. She did not ask for clarification or point out the error. She simply organized the charts in the order he had suggested, the wrong order, and filed them away. Whitfield left, satisfied that he had finally gotten a reaction. He had not. What he had gotten was her silence, which was far more dangerous. After her shift ended at 11:15, Laura walked to her car through the parking garage. The fluorescent lights above threw everything into a kind of harsh, shadowless exposure. Her boots echoed against the concrete, the regulation hospital clogs, not the ones she kept hidden. In her locker in the break room, buried under sweaters she never wore and a gym bag she had never opened, sat a pair of worn combat boots. They were desert tan, scarred at the heels, with dust from Ticrit still ground into the creases of the leather. She had kept them for 2 years. She had never planned to wear them again. Tonight, in the supply closet during her break, alone except for the fluorescent hum and the ghost of her own breathing, she had gripped those boots with both hands. Let her hands tremble for 30 seconds, really tremble, the trembling of restraint finally reaching its limit. Let her jaw clench so hard her teeth ached. Then she had forced the trembling down, packed it away, and returned to work with her composure intact once more. Pain was information. Anger was data. The question was what she would do with it. But that wasn't the worst part. The next morning, Laura arrived for her shift to find her assignment changed. Room for B, the new admission, the Navy SEAL named Marcus Chen, who had arrived the previous day with paralysis from T6 down and a faded tattoo on his right arm that read Laura Bennett in military stencil, had been reassigned. She was moved to post-op recovery instead. She was given 3 other patients, all routine, all uncomplicated, all deliberately selected to keep her away from anyone important. The reassignment came with a notation in the system from Dr. Whitfield: patient exhibits confusion regarding past trauma. Recommend limiting exposure to unfamiliar staff to prevent dissociative episodes. It was medical language for removing her. It was strategic. It was exactly the kind of move that a competent antagonist makes when social humiliation fails to break his target. He escalates to institutional power, to systems, to the leverage that exists beyond individual interaction. Marcus Chen had been confused when she introduced herself the previous afternoon. His eyes had tracked her name tag the way a sniper tracks movement. Bennett, he had repeated, the word tasting foreign in his mouth. His right arm, scarred and pale from 18 months of limited mobility, bore coordinates and a date alongside her name. 2019, Ticrit. She had not asked him to explain it. She had simply adjusted his pillow and moved on. But Whitfield had noticed the moment of connection. Whitfield had seen something in the way Marcus looked at her and decided it was a threat worth managing. That evening, sitting in her car in the parking garage for the second night in a row, Laura understood what was happening. Whitfield was no longer just throwing charts and making bets. He was moving pieces on a board. He was using institutional leverage, hospital policy, medical judgment, the authority granted to senior physicians to make staffing decisions. He was being strategic. He was being competent. And he was, in his way, being intelligent. She sat with her hands on the steering wheel, engine off, thinking about those combat boots waiting in the locker and the coordinates on a dead man's arm who was, impossibly, still alive. She thought about restraint and what it cost. She thought about the difference between surviving and choosing to stay disappeared. The question, she realized, was not how much longer she could maintain this composure. The question was what would happen when she finally stopped. The write-ups started appearing Wednesday morning, each one a surgical strike of institutional precision. Dr. Whitfield had learned something important over his 23 years at Seattle General. You didn't need to scream at someone to destroy them. You just needed to document everything. The first write-up waited in Laura's locker, printed on official hospital letterhead, signed by Whitfield himself. Improper documentation formatting. Her patient notes from Tuesday's 14:30 assessment allegedly lacked sufficient specificity regarding vital sign intervals. The violation was technically defensible if you squinted hard enough and ignored that every other nurse on the surgical floor documented exactly the same way. Laura read it standing in the break room, her jaw tightening by a single millimeter, her eyes moving through the text with the same methodical precision she once used to scan a desert for muzzle flashes. She folded the paper once and placed it in her pocket. The second write-up came at 16:45, hand-delivered by the charge nurse with visible discomfort. Unauthorized patient interaction. Laura had allegedly spent 12 minutes with Marcus Chen during her break yesterday, discussing his tattoos and his recovery timeline without a physician present, which constituted unsupervised psychological intervention outside her scope of practice. The charge nurse wouldn't meet her eyes. Laura took the paper without speaking. The smell of bleach and antiseptic suddenly felt suffocating, the kind of chemical burn that made her remember ticret dust in her lungs. The third write-up appeared in her mailbox at 18:20, slipped inside a sealed envelope marked Personnel, Confidential. Failure to follow chain of command protocols. On 3 separate occasions, she had directly addressed clinical concerns with residents and interns rather than routing her observations through Dr. Whitfield first, thereby undermining the hierarchical structure essential to patient safety. Each write-up was technically bulletproof. Each one was also a lie engineered by a man who had learned to weaponize bureaucracy better than most people wielded scalpels. That night, after her shift ended, Laura drove to her apartment, a sparse 2-bedroom in a neighborhood where nobody asked questions, and sat in the dark with her laptop. The worn combat boots sat on the coffee table, their leather creased with the memory of ticret's heat. She typed her own name into the hospital's employee database. 2 years. That's how far back the records went. 2 years, 1 month, and 6 days. Before that, a blank. She pulled up her previous employment history, the one she'd constructed with help from a contact she couldn't name through channels she'd forgotten deliberately. St. Jude's Memorial in Chicago. Mercy General in Seattle. Oak Creek Memorial in Washington, D.C. Her finger hovered over the mouse button. She clicked. The records didn't exist. No St. Jude's employment verification available. Mercy General had no record of a Laura Bennett on staff. Oak Creek Memorial's HR database returned an error, no such employee found. She tried different name variations. Nothing. It was clean work, whoever had done it. Completely bulletproof. Also completely erased, which meant someone had wanted her to disappear so thoroughly that there couldn't even be a paper trail of her disappearing. The phone on her desk buzzed. Text from an unknown number. Dr. Whitfield made calls today. 3 calls. Castellano, Johns Hopkins, and someone listed as a private investigator. You should know. She closed the laptop. Her hands were steady. The rest of her wasn't. Thursday morning, she reported to work at 6:16 as always. The hospital corridor smelled like floor wax and coffee and something chemical underneath, the kind of smell that meant cleaning crews had scrubbed surfaces at 3 a.m. Her badge still worked. For now. She stopped by HR at 7:15 and asked directly if there was anything she needed to know. The HR manager, Jennifer Kwan, usually friendly, now visibly uncomfortable, hesitated for exactly 2 seconds too long. We've received some inquiries about credential verification. Nothing serious. Just routine background procedures. You'll probably be contacted for some clarification. Laura understood what that meant. Whitfield had made his calls. The board members had listened. Someone was building a case, brick by brick, document by document, and each brick was so carefully placed that removing one would require demolishing everything else. She worked her shift the same way she'd worked every shift, competently, silently, without drawing attention. She checked on Marcus Chen for times, maintaining professional distance, never lingering, never initiating conversation beyond what his care required. His eyes tracked her movements with that same confused recognition, like he was trying to remember someone from a dream he couldn't quite hold onto upon waking. She'd learned to live in that liminal space, close enough to save, far enough to disappear. The email arrived Friday at 14:20. From the hospital's legal compliance officer, CC it to HR and Whitfield himself. A formal request for background investigation into Laura Bennett, RN, pending verification of credentials and work history. She was requested to provide documentation of nursing school attendance, all prior employment records, and references from supervisory staff at her previous hospitals. The deadline for response was 72 hours. Laura opened her personnel file and stared at the documentation she'd provided 26 months ago, transcripts from a nursing program that technically existed but had no digital records. Employment letters from hospitals that had accepted cash payments to forget she'd ever worked there. References from supervisors who no longer existed. It was the kind of identity that could withstand casual scrutiny. It couldn't survive a kind of scrutiny that a board member could motivate someone to provide. She called the number from her previous contact, the one she'd memorized and then erased from her phone. It rang once before someone answered with no greeting. "My situation has escalated," she said. A pause. Then, "How much damage?" "Board level." "State oversight." "Background investigation initiated." "I have 72 hours to provide documentation I can't provide." Another pause, longer. Then, "Stand by." "Don't say anything to anyone." "Don't attempt to reconstruct records." "Don't run." "Understand." She understood. She'd been here before, in different contexts, in different uniforms, in different countries, and she understood that when someone told you to stand by, you stood by. You didn't ask questions. You didn't move. You became very, very still and you waited for the cavalry that might or might not arrive before the walls came down. She finished her shift. She drove home. She sat in her apartment with the darkness settling around her like a tactical veil, and she pulled out the combat boots from her locker. The leather was worn and creased. Dust from Tikrit still clung to the soles, actual dust, not metaphorical. She could taste it sometimes when the smell triggered the memory. Marcus Chen had her name tattooed on his arm. He'd carried that name into an operation she couldn't discuss and carried it out again because someone had made the decision to pick him up when things went wrong. And Whitfield had decided that decision, that act of loyalty, that moment of choosing, was beneath him. Was something to mock. Was something to destroy. The trembling wasn't fear. The trembling, when it finally came, was restraint. Raw, physical, barely contained restraint. She gripped the edge of her kitchen counter, her knuckles whitening, and she let herself feel the weight of the last 26 months pressing down. The hiding. The erasure. The deliberate shrinking of herself into a space that someone like Whitfield could fit inside his hierarchy and then mock for taking up space in it at all. But that wasn't what broke her composure. What broke it was the realization that Whitfield had found the thread. Someone in the government, whether at the Pentagon or the State Medical Board or somewhere in between, had built this identity specifically to unravel under pressure. And pressure was exactly what Whitfield was applying. Institutional pressure, the kind that couldn't be fought with hands or tactical skill or anything except the complete and total exposure of who she actually was. And exposure meant the end of everything. The end of the identity. The end of her position. The end of the careful fiction that allowed her to exist as Laura Bennett, RN, instead of Master Chief Petty Officer Bennett, whose records had been erased from existence for reasons that lived in classified files in buildings she was forbidden from entering. She picked up her phone. She didn't call anyone. But she left it on the kitchen table, screen up, waiting. And she went to her bedroom and lay in the dark and waited for the response that would either save her or confirm that she'd been disposable the entire time. The rain started around midnight, hammering against the window with the rhythm of helicopter rotors in the distance. She didn't sleep. She lay there with her hand steady and her composure intact and her future held together by threads that a man like Whitfield was actively cutting, one right up at a time. The suspension papers arrived at 6:14 a.m., slipped under her apartment door in a manila envelope that felt heavier than its weight should allow. Laura read them standing in her kitchen with coffee going cold in her hands, the words arranging themselves into a sentence that barely needed reading: effective immediately, pending investigation, badge deactivated, access revoked, do not contact hospital staff. The papers trembled, not her hands, just the air moving through the open window, the October wind pushing at everything loose. She set them on the counter beside the discharge paperwork she'd already signed. 2 weeks. She had 2 weeks of severance and a career that had evaporated like sweat under a desert sun. The combat boots sat on her coffee table where she'd left them, soles up, ticret dust still embedded in the treads after 2 years. She should have thrown them out 100 times. She never did. She stared at them the way a drowning person stares at a life preserver that's just out of reach, thinking about how easy it would be to stop fighting, to let the current take her under, to disappear so completely that even the government couldn't find her if they tried. Maybe that was the mercy she'd been waiting for. Maybe this was it. Her phone buzzed at 11:53 p.m. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. It's Sergeant Hayes, charge nurse, night shift. His voice moved like a Black Hawk rotor, steady, industrial, built for bad weather. Marcus Chen is crashing. Whitfield's on call. Thought you should know. She closed her eyes. She'd already quit. Already accepted it. Already said goodbye to that place in every way that mattered. I'm suspended. I know. Hayes breathed once. Your shift ended at 2 p.m. anyway. This is just information. The line went dead. She was reaching for the television remote when her phone buzzed again. Text message from Hayes, his heart stopped. For B. She didn't think about it. Thinking would have changed the answer. Her keys were in her hand before she realized her body had made a decision her brain hadn't approved yet. The drive from her apartment on Bellaria to Seattle General took 14 minutes at midnight, red lights becoming suggestions when you moved with enough purpose. She parked in a loading zone, illegal, but who was going to cite a suspended nurse at midnight, and used the side entrance that night staff always props open for smoke breaks, the kind of hospitality that exists outside official policy because nurses understand that some people need to move through walls. The code blue alarm screamed from 4B before she reached the 4th floor landing. She could hear the compressions through the walls, hear the electrical charge of the defibrillator, hear Whitfield's frozen panic making itself known as silence, the absence of orders, the void where leadership should be. She didn't announce herself. She walked into the room moving with the terrifying fluid precision of someone who had cleared buildings under fire, muscle memory so complete it needed no permission. Marcus Chen was flatlined. Monitor showed nothing but a straight dark line, the kind of line that meant the next 2 minutes were the only 2 minutes that mattered. A resident with panic in his eyes was doing compressions with terrible form, elbows bent, compressions too shallow, wasting motion. Whitfield stood against the wall with his hand still on the crash cart, jaw slack, eyes moving but not focusing. Move, Laura said. Not a request. It was the voice of someone who had coordinated casualties under mortar fire. The resident stepped back. She took over compressions, perfect depth, 90 compressions per minute, her hands moving like they were operated by muscle memory rather than conscious thought. She called for epinephrine. Called for the defibrillator to charge. Whitfield tried to speak. "You're suspended, you can't be here." She shocked Marcus once. Chest convulsed. Monitor flat. No response. Shocked him again. Nothing. His heart would not restart. She'd seen it before. Sometimes the organ just surrendered, just decided that whatever came next didn't matter enough to keep beating. She made the call that no nurse in the United States was legally authorized to make: "We need a thoracotomy. Now." Whitfield's voice came thin and distant. "That's not protocol, you can't." She was already prepping the chest, already had the scalpel from the crash cart, already was opening Marcus Chen's chest cavity with the muscle memory of a person who had performed emergency surgery in the field with nothing but a combat knife and adrenaline. 90 seconds. Open. Exposed. She reached inside his chest cavity and found his heart, and began performing direct cardiac massage with her hands, actually inside his chest, actually holding his heart, manually pumping blood because the organ had forgotten how to do it on its own. Her hands moved like they'd done this before. Because they had. Whitfield stumbled backward against the wall. His face had gone the color of stale hospital sheets. For minutes. That was all it took. Marcus's heart restarted under her palms. Sinus rhythm. The monitor showed the truth, the electrical activity returned, the beat resumed, and the flat line became a living heartbeat again. She stepped back. Blood covered her forearms up to the elbows, dark and slick. She didn't look at Whitfield. She walked out of the room without a word, without an explanation, without the slightest acknowledgement that she had just performed a procedure that would destroy her career, nullify her suspension, and paint a target on her back that the hospital administration would spend the next hours figuring out how to interpret. What happened next didn't just silence the room, it ended careers. Whitfield made the first phone call at 12:34 a.m. from his personal cell in the physician's lounge, his voice shaking like a man who understood that his power was about to be weaponized against him. He called Dr. Castellano on the hospital board. She came back. While suspended. Without authorization. She performed emergency surgery. She's clearly unhinged, she could be a danger to patients. The voice on the other end cut him off. "We'll need to review the circumstances. Hang tight." The second call at 1:07 a.m. went to the State Medical Oversight Committee's emergency hotline. "I'm reporting a nurse practicing beyond her scope. Open cardiac massage. Emergency thoracotomy. She has no surgical training, she could have killed him." The voice taking the report was professional, detached, documenting every word like it was material evidence. The third call at 1:43 a.m. went to the private investigator. "I need answers tonight. There's something about this woman that doesn't add up. Check military databases. Check federal employment records. Check if there's any sealed file, any classified contract, anything that explains why a suspended nurse would risk her entire career to save one patient." The investigator listened and said nothing, and Whitfield understood that silence meant the investigator had already found something, had already seen something in those databases that changed the nature of the question from "Who is Laura Bennett?" to "Oh God, who have I been attacking?" By 6:06 a.m., Laura had termination papers delivered to her apartment, a state investigation notice, and a notification from the state's Attorney General's office that she was being reviewed for potential criminal charges: practicing medicine without a license, unauthorized surgical procedure, violation of supervised medical practice protocols. The hospital had moved faster than a predator striking. By noon, those charges would evaporate. But Laura didn't know that yet. She sat in her car in the parking garage with the worn combat boots on the passenger seat, Ticrat dust in the treads like soil from a country she'd been buried in, and she thought about how much easier it would be to simply keep driving, to let this life fade like every life before it, to disappear so completely that even the ghosts wouldn't know where to find her. She had made it exactly 72 hours as a civilian before the government decided she belonged to them again. The rotor wash hit the windows at 9:08 a.m., and everyone in Seattle General's executive boardroom felt it before they heard it. 2 Black Hawk helicopters descending onto the rooftop like judgment itself. Dr. Whitfield was mid-sentence, presenting his case against Laura Bennett to the assembled board members, 5 doctors, 3 administrators, 1 legal counsel, when the building began to shake. The coffee cups rattled. The fluorescent lights flickered. A Navy lieutenant commander walked through the boardroom doors wearing dress blue so sharp they looked like they could cut, and he didn't knock, didn't ask permission, just stepped inside and waited for quiet. "We're looking for Phantom," he said. 7 words. They landed like a grenade. The room exhaled. Every head turned toward Whitfield, who opened his mouth and closed it. The Marine veteran who worked hospital security, 23 years active duty, now pushing a metal detector at the entrance, felt his chest tighten. He'd known. Somehow, he'd always known. His daughter had shown him the tattoo on Marcus Chen's arm the first week Laura arrived. L. Bennett. He'd thought it was coincidence. He'd been wrong about a lot of things. The lieutenant commander looked at Dr. Castellano, the chief of surgery, who looked at legal counsel, who looked at the floor. Nobody spoke. The silence was the kind that comes just before lives end. The veteran security guard stood up from his station on the 3rd floor. He'd been monitoring the hallway where Laura sat alone in a break room, still technically suspended, still technically waiting for nothing, and he walked downstairs. His boots echoed on the tile. He pushed through the boardroom doors and saluted. "Master Chief Petty Officer Bennett, sir." 3rd floor. Suspended. The room went white. Not metaphorically. The actual color of the light seemed to drain. A 2-star general stepped forward, shoulder boards catching the fluorescent light like medals being awarded in real time, and he opened a manila folder. His voice was measured, methodical, the voice of someone reading facts into a record that would exist forever. "For Bronze Stars," he said. The first one landed like a punch. Second one was Anbar Province, 2011. Direct action raid. She led the element in. 2 casualties under fire. She carried them out. The room didn't move. Whitfield's face had gone the color of old surgical gloves. 2 purple hearts. The general's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. 1 from shrapnel. 1 from a close-quarters engagement, 2013, Loga Province. 37 stitches across her left shoulder blade. She was back in the field 3 weeks later. Dr. Kwon, no, the general didn't call him that, he was just a name on a board somewhere now, leaned back in his chair. He understood, in that moment, what it meant to have no authority in a room. To be present but powerless. Distinguished Warfare Medal. That's the one they don't talk about. The general closed the folder slightly, like he was saving the worst for last. Tikrit, 2014. Classified operation. Master Chief Bennett held a perimeter position alone for 11 hours while her element evacuated to the north. 3 SEALs. 2 came out because of her. 1 came out because she went back in after the initial extraction and carried him from a burning structure. His heart stopped twice. She restarted it twice. Manually. In the field. Someone in the room, a woman from HR, was counting on her fingers, trying to understand what 11 hours alone meant. Trying to picture it. "We have video footage recovered from one of those SEALs' helmet cams," the general said. "It was classified. Remains classified. But I've been authorized to tell you that what we saw in that footage changed the military's protocols on evacuation procedures." Master Chief Bennett's actions that day saved an estimated 214 lives in subsequent operations through policy revision alone. The door opened. 2 orderlies wheeled Marcus Chen into the boardroom. He shouldn't have been there, wasn't permitted to leave the rehab ward yet, but he was. His left arm, the one with the tattoo, hung at his side. The one with the faded L. Bennett inked in his own blood during a field transfusion when the medics for bags had run dry. Marcus lifted his arm slowly. The movement cost him everything, his face went grey with effort, but he did it. He showed them the name. "She's the reason I'm alive twice now," he said. His voice was paper-thin, barely there, but it filled the room like a command. "Once in 2014. Once last week. She's the best Marine I've ever served with. And this hospital, you suspended her for saving my life." The silence lasted exactly 10 seconds. The general counted them silently. 10 seconds of institutional collapse. 10 seconds of men and women realizing they'd been standing next to a legend and trying to break her. The room moved. Chairs scraped. Legal counsel was making calls. Someone was drafting a formal apology. Dr. Castellano excused himself. He'd support Whitfield tomorrow, deny it the day after, then quietly resign from the board within the month. The lieutenant commander already had his phone out, already calling the Pentagon to report that Phantom had been located and the civilian situation had been managed. Everything moved very fast and very slow at the same time. But that wasn't the worst part for Dr. Whitfield. That happened 6 hours later, at 3:14 p.m., when a second-year resident named Chen, no relation to Marcus, just another name in the machine, hit upload on his Twitter account and posted a video he'd been sitting on since the week before. High definition. Perfect audio. Shot from the doorway of the hospital cafeteria. Dr. Whitfield's voice, carrying across 40 feet of linoleum and fluorescent light, "I give Bennett here 1 week before she quits." The tray crashing to the floor. Coffee and salad and bread rolls scattering like debris. "Better clean that up, sweetheart." Laura kneeling. 60 staff members watching. And in the corner of the frame, the detail that destroyed everything, a younger resident trying to hide a smile. The guilt written on his face like a confession. By 6:19 p.m., the video had 40,000 views. By 9:51 p.m., it had 600,000 and was trending with #Seattle General and #JustANurse and #MasterChief. The nursing advocacy networks picked it up. The military family blogs picked it up. NBC local news had already called for comment. A former patient recognized Whitfield's voice, found his name, and posted her own story. He'd called her hysterical during a post-op complication and delayed her care 3 hours while she bled internally. Others came forward. A resident from 2 years prior. A scrub tech from 5 years before. The complaints that had been filed and buried, refiled and ignored, suddenly had a face and a voice and a Twitter account. At 10:32 p.m., Dr. Martin Kwon, the man from Johns Hopkins, the mentor who'd written Whitfield's recommendation letters 20 years ago, the surgeon who'd championed his career through 3 promotions, published an open letter on the Johns Hopkins medical blog. It was not a soft withdrawal of support. It was surgical. "I made a grave error in professional judgment," Kwon wrote, and each word was chosen to cut. "I recommended a man to lead in a field where leadership requires not just competence but character. The footage I have watched this evening demonstrates a pattern of behavior that suggests a fundamental misunderstanding of what authority means. Authority is stewardship. Authority is service. What I see in that video is neither. I am requesting that Johns Hopkins Medical review his credentials and consider revoking his alumni status. I am also requesting that any hospital or institution considering his candidacy for employment review the full context of his professional history before offering him access to vulnerable patients." Kwon's letter had weight because Kwon had weight. He'd been invited to speak at the Mayo Clinic. He'd published 47 papers on surgical innovation. When he disowned Whitfield, the entire medical establishment felt it like a seismic shift. The hospital board convened at midnight. Emergency session. Dr. Castellano, sensing which way the wind would blow, abstained from the vote. The motion passed unanimously, immediate suspension of surgical privileges pending full investigation. Mandatory ethics review. Temporary reassignment to administrative duties, a humiliation so complete it barely qualified as punishment. Whitfield sat in his office at 2:13 a.m., scrolling through Twitter mentions, watching his career disintegrate in real time like a building collapsing in footage shot at the wrong speed. The mentions were brutal. The retweets were relentless. A woman from the viral video had done an interview with local news. He told me I was too emotional to make medical decisions, she said. But he was the one who was emotional. He was angry. He was cruel. And nobody stopped him. His hand shook. For the first time in 20 years, his hand shook. 6 months later, Dr. Whitfield taught CPR fundamentals at Houston Community College for $18 per hour. He demonstrated chest compressions on a plastic dummy named and, blue-faced, forever unconscious, to a room of 20 students who didn't know his name and would have forgotten it if they did. His surgical privileges had been permanently revoked after the board investigation uncovered 8 additional complaints, all previously dismissed by administrators who'd wanted to protect his reputation. Dr. Castellano had quietly resigned from the board by month 3, citing personal reasons. The private investigator's report on Laura Bennett's fabricated employment history had been destroyed. The government had seen to that. But none of that mattered anymore. Laura Bennett walked the halls of Seattle General one final time wearing dress blues that fit her like a second skin, Master Chief Petty Officer shoulder boards catching the fluorescent light like medals being awarded in real time. The ceremony was at 2:44 p.m. on a Thursday. Marcus Chen sat in the front row in a wheelchair. The experimental therapy that Laura's cardiac intervention had saved him to receive was working, slowly, painfully, but working. His fingers could move now. His legs had feeling. He was learning to live a third time. The worn combat boots were placed in a shadow box beside a photograph from Tikrit, all of them younger, all of them armed, all of them alive in a way that civilians couldn't understand. The shadow box was mounted in the hospital's main corridor at eye level, with a plaque engraved below, "Service Beyond Self." People would walk past it every day. They would read it. Some would understand. Most would move on. That was fine. Laura gave a 3-minute speech. Her voice had dropped an octave since the suspension. Her movements were precise, military, the movements of someone who'd made peace with being seen. She talked about the patients she'd held. The lives she'd been permitted to touch. The staff who'd stood with her when they could have looked away. She ended with a word she meant with every cell in her body. Power is not a title. Power is the ability to help. The charge nurse, the Marine veteran who'd made the call 6 months earlier, stood and saluted. Laura returned it, crisp and formal and absolute. As she walked toward the exit, Marcus caught up to her in the parking garage, wheelchair moving fast, and he simply said what needed saying, "Thank you for carrying me." Both times. Laura stopped. Turned. And for the first time in 2 years, smiled fully, not the composed smile of survival, but the genuine smile of someone whose war was finally over. That's what we do, Marcus. We carry each other home. The rotor wash from that morning was gone now. The helicopters were gone. The board members had returned to their offices. The hospital had moved on. But in the shadow box on the 3rd floor, those boots stood at attention, still carrying the dust of Tikrit in their treads, still waiting to tell their story to the people brave enough to listen. If you've ever been underestimated and proven them wrong, if you've ever kept your composure while the world tried to break you, if you've ever seen quiet strength become unstoppable force, subscribe to see more stories like this one. And comment below, have you ever met someone whose hidden strength changed everything?